The distress call came from a trail that wasn't even open that season. I was halfway through a routine radio check when dispatch patched it in, a shaky male voice repeating coordinates that didn't match any marked campsite, just a section of restricted forest we kept closed after a landslide the year before. I remember checking the map twice, because the numbers pointed straight into a zone we'd flagged for unstable ground. No public access, no maintenance, nothing. The caller said his friend had fallen, said he couldn't move him, said there was someone else out there watching them. That last part almost sounded like an afterthought, like he wasn't sure if he should even say it. I asked for a description, but the signal cut to static, then came back with a faint echo of my own voice repeating half a second late. That kind of interference happens sometimes in the mountains, but not like that, not clean enough to sound deliberate. I logged the call, grabbed a medical pack, and headed out before backup could even be assigned, because if someone was injured in that zone, waiting meant risking a collapse underfoot. The trailhead gate was still locked when I got there, chain intact, sign clearly posted, but there were fresh tire tracks in the dirt just outside, not official vehicles, something heavier, deep treads like a utility truck, or maybe a modified SUV. I noted it, took a quick photo, and radioed in that I was proceeding on foot. Dispatch confirmed, but their voice sounded distorted, stretched, like it was being pulled apart before it reached me. About 20 minutes in, the path narrowed and started to break apart, sections of it sliding downhill in loose gravel, and that's when I noticed the footprints. 2 sets, one dragging slightly, consistent with someone supporting another person's weight. That matched the call, at least at first. But then there was a third set, lighter, spaced farther apart, like whoever made them was keeping distance. They didn't overlap. They circled. I followed all 3 without thinking too much about it, because in search and rescue you don't get the luxury of second-guessing every sign. The air was still, no wind, but I kept hearing branches snap somewhere off to my left, always just out of view, always matching my pace. I called out once, announced myself, standard protocol, but the only response was the faint crackle of my radio picking up something that sounded like breathing, slow and uneven. I checked the channel, made sure I wasn't cross-connected, but it was coming through on our main frequency. That's when I started to get that feeling you can't really explain, like you're being measured, not just watched. About an hour in, I found the first piece of gear, a backpack propped against a tree at shoulder height, not dropped, not thrown, placed. There, carefully. Inside were supplies still neatly packed, water unopened, food untouched, and a phone with a cracked screen. The battery was dead, but the last notification visible was a missed call from an unknown number. I logged it, took it with me, and kept moving, because the tracks continued uphill into a denser section where the ground turned softer, almost muddy despite the dry weather. That didn't make sense, and neither did the smell that started to linger, something metallic, like old tools or rusted equipment. I radioed dispatch again, tried to update them, but all I got back was my own message looping, slightly delayed, layered over itself until it became unintelligible. I switched to a secondary channel, same result. It's strange how often things like this get dismissed later as technical faults, even though the timing never quite adds up. A few minutes later, I saw the second hiker, or what I thought was him at first. He was standing about 30 yards ahead, facing away from me, shoulders hunched, completely still. I called out, told him to stay where he was, but he didn't react. As I got closer, I realized something was off. His posture was too rigid, arms hanging straight down, head tilted slightly to one side. Then I noticed the ground around him was untouched, no footprints leading to where he stood, just the ones I'd been following stopping about 10 feet back. When I closed the distance, I saw why. It wasn't a person. It was a jacket stuffed with branches, shaped roughly like a torso, propped upright with a hiking pole driven into the ground behind it. The hood was pulled up, and someone had placed a pair of sunglasses over the opening where a face would be. For a second, I just stood there trying to process it, because it didn't fit any scenario I'd been trained for. Then I heard movement behind me, quick and deliberate. I turned, but there was nothing there, except the trail and the trees. Still, the footprints told a different story. That third set had closed in while I was distracted, now only a few feet behind my own. I could see where whoever it was had stopped, pivoted, and stepped back into the brush. I called it in, or at least I tried to, but the radio only gave me that same looping interference. At that point, I made the decision to turn back and request full support, because this was no longer just a rescue. But as I retraced my steps, the path didn't match what I remembered. The landmarks were slightly off, a fallen log in the wrong position, a rock formation I didn't recall passing. It's easy to get disoriented in dense terrain, but this felt different, like subtle adjustments had been made while I wasn't looking. I checked my GPS, but it kept flickering between coordinates, never settling long enough to be useful. That's when I saw the light. It was faint, maybe 50 yards downhill, a steady glow that didn't move. At first, I thought it might be the injured hiker using a flashlight or a phone, so I headed toward it despite my better judgment. As I got closer, I realized it was coming from a lantern sitting on the ground next to a small clearing. No campsite, no gear, just the lantern and a folded piece of paper weighed down with a rock. I approached slowly, scanning the area, but everything was quiet. The paper had my name written on it. Not printed, not typed, written in uneven letters like someone copying it from memory. Underneath, it said, "You're not the first to come out here." I don't know how long I stood there reading it, but it felt longer than it should have. Then my radio came to life again, clear this time, dispatch asking for my status like nothing had happened. I responded immediately, gave them my location as best as I could, and told them I was withdrawing. They acknowledged, said backup was en route, and advised me to stay put. I didn't. I started moving uphill, away from the clearing, because staying in one place felt like the worst possible option. As I climbed, I kept hearing footsteps behind me, always matching my pace, never closing the distance, never falling back. I didn't turn around again. I just focused on getting out. Eventually, the terrain started to look familiar, and I found the broken section of trail I'd crossed earlier. From there, it was another 30 minutes to the line of matter for free. I just said that there was a matter of coffee inside the trail gate. When I reached it, I saw the same tire tracks, but now there was a vehicle parked just beyond them, engine off, windows tinted. It wasn't there when I arrived. I approached cautiously, called out, but there was no response. Through the windshield, I could see a clipboard resting on the passenger seat. On it was a log sheet, the kind we use for tracking patrols. My name was. I chose to help us my feet. I didn't feel the other beds of us convicted, and watched to make my feet. No sound, no sign of it leaving, just empty space where it had been. We searched the area for hours, but we never found the injured hiker or his friend. The backpack I'd recovered was logged, the coordinates I'd followed were mapped, and the restricted zone was sealed off again. Officially, it was marked as a false emergency, possibly a prank or miscommunication. Unofficially, nobody could explain the extra footprints, the interference, or the log sheet with my name already written in. I went back once, a few weeks later, with the team this time, just to see if anything had been missed. The trail was the same, the terrain unchanged, but when we reached the spot where I had found the jacket figure, there was nothing there. No sign it had ever existed. The only thing we did find was a single set of footprints leading away from that location, deeper into a restricted zone, spaced far apart, like whoever made them was in no hurry at all. They stopped abruptly at the edge of a steep drop, where the ground gave way to loose rock. No tracks going down, no tracks coming back. Just an empty edge and silence. I still think about that note sometimes, the way my name was written, like someone had practiced it. And every now and then, during routine radio checks, I hear a faint delay, my own voice echoing back just slightly off, like it's coming from somewhere it shouldn't. The ranger at the trailhead waved me down and asked why I'd come back alone when I had arrived with someone else. I told him I'd been hiking solo all morning, But he pointed to the logbook and showed me two names signed in under mine. Same handwriting, same time. That didn't sit right, but I figured it was just a mistake or someone messing around. I corrected it, crossed out the extra name, and headed up the trail anyway because I had planned this hike for weeks and didn't want to lose the day. About 10 minutes in, I noticed the weather shifting faster than expected. The sky had been clear, but clouds were rolling in low and fast, cutting off the light in a way that made the trail look flatter than it actually was. I checked my watch, made a note of the time, and kept a steady pace. Nothing unusual yet, just a little off. Around the first mile marker, I saw a tent set up just off the path, tucked between two trees like someone didn't want it visible from the trail. That was strange because overnight camping wasn't allowed in that section, and there were no tags or permits attached to it. I called out, standard procedure, asked if anyone was there, but got no response. The zipper was half open, so I stepped closer and looked inside. It was empty, but not abandoned. There was a sleeping bag still warm, a half-eaten energy bar, and a portable radio sitting on top of a folded map. The radio was on, but it wasn't tuned to any station I recognized. It was just static, broken occasionally by a faint voice repeating numbers too quickly to follow. I backed away, made a note to report it later, and continued up the trail, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd walked into something I wasn't supposed to see. About 20 minutes later, I heard footsteps behind me. At first, I thought it was another hiker catching up, so I slowed slightly, expecting them to pass, but the steps matched mine exactly, stopping when I stopped, starting when I started. I turned around, but the trail was empty, just a bend in the path and dense trees on either side. I waited for a minute, listening, but there was nothing. I told myself it was just sound carrying oddly through the forest, and kept going. A little further up, I reached a fork in the trail that shouldn't have been there. I had studied the map before coming out, and there was only supposed to be one route, a straight climb to the overlook. But now there were two paths, one clearly marked, the other freshly cut, with branches pushed aside and dirt still loose underfoot. Someone had made that second path recently, and it led off at a slight angle, disappearing into thicker brush. There was no sign indicating which way to go, and the official marker post looked like it had been turned slightly, not enough to notice at a glance, but enough to make the original trail seem less obvious. I stood there for a moment, deciding, when I heard that same faint radio static again, this time coming from the unmarked path. It wasn't loud, but it was distinct, the same broken voice underneath it. I don't know why I followed it. Maybe curiosity, maybe concern that someone out there needed help, but I stepped onto that path and started moving. The ground was uneven, the incline steeper, and the trees grew closer together, blocking out what little light was left. After a few minutes, I noticed small markers tied to branches, strips of fabric, each one a different color. They weren't official trail markers. They looked random, like someone had torn them from clothing or gear. I counted at least 6 before I realized they were spaced in a pattern, always at eye level, always on the right side of the path. It felt intentional, like they were guiding someone, but I couldn't tell if it was towards something or away from it. The static grew louder as I went deeper, and the voice started to come through more clearly, still repeating numbers, but now there were pauses between them, like someone was waiting for a response that never came. I tried to match the numbers to coordinates in my head, but they didn't line up with anything I knew. That's when I saw the second tent. This one was set up directly in the middle of the path, blocking it completely. It was zipped shut, and unlike the first one, it looked older, dirtier, like it had been there for a while. I called out again, no answer. As I got closer, I noticed the zipper was secured with a small lock, the kind you'd use on luggage. That didn't make sense. You don't lock a tent from the outside unless you don't want something inside to get out. I hesitated, then reached out and touched the fabric. It was cold, colder than the surrounding air, and there was a faint smell coming from it, something stale and chemical. I stepped back immediately, deciding not to open it, and that's when the radio voice stopped mid-number. The silence that followed was heavier than anything I'd heard all day. Then, from somewhere behind me, I heard my own voice call out my name. Not echoing, but distorted, just clear and direct, like someone standing a few feet away. I turned quickly, expecting to see another hiker or maybe the ranger from earlier, but there was no one there. Just the path I had come from, now looking narrower than I remembered. I called out again, louder this time, but the only response was that same voice repeating my name, this time from a different direction, off to the left, deeper into the trees. It's strange how often people dismiss things like this as tricks of the mind, but when you hear your own voice coming from somewhere else, it's hard to ignore. I decided then to turn back, to retrace my steps and get out of there. But when I reached the fork, again, it wasn't the same. The marked trail was gone, replaced by two unmarked paths that looked nearly identical. The marker post had been turned completely around, facing the opposite direction. I checked my phone for GPS, but there was no signal, just a blank map and a spinning icon that never resolved. The clouds had thickened overhead, and it was getting darker faster than it should have been for that time of day. I picked one of the pads at random and started moving quickly, trying to keep my bearings, but the terrain kept shifting in subtle ways. Trees I thought I had passed reappeared, rocks seemed to change position, and the ground felt softer, almost like it had been recently disturbed. After what felt like an hour, I came across another campsite, this one clearly abandoned. There were 3 tents, all collapsed, and a fire pit filled with ash that looked fresh despite the damp air. Scattered around were personal items, a shoe, broken flashlight, a notebook with pages torn out. I flipped through what was left and saw entries describing the same trail, the same fork, the same confusion about the pass. One line stood out, "They keep moving the way out." I didn't have time to process it fully because the radio static started again, louder now, coming from everywhere at once. The voice was no longer just numbers. It was fragments of sentences, pieces of conversations, some of them sounding like the ranger at the trailhead, others like hikers calling out to each other. Mixed in were phrases I recognized from earlier in the day, things I had said out loud, now being repeated back to me in a different order. I dropped the notebook and started running, not caring which direction I was going, just trying to get away from the sound. Branches scraped against my arms, the ground slipped under my feet, but I kept moving until I saw a break in the trees in what looked like the original trail. I followed it without stopping, pushing through the last stretch until I finally saw the trailhead gate ahead. The ranger was still there, standing in the same spot, watching me approach. As I got closer, I realized something was off. His uniform was slightly different. The badge on his chest didn't match the one I had seen earlier, and the logbook on the table was open to a different page. I slowed down, trying to catch my breath, and he looked at me with a confused expression. "You heading out already?" he asked, like he hadn't seen me before. I nodded, too tired to explain, and walked past him toward my car. Before I got in, I glanced back at the logbook. My name was there, signed in at the top of the page, but underneath it were 3 more entries, all in the same handwriting, all variations of my name, each one slightly misspelled. I pointed it out to the ranger, but when he looked, the page was blank, except for my original entry. He said I probably just imagined it, that people get turned around out there more often than they admit. I didn't argue. I just got in my car and left. Later that night, I checked my gear and found one of those fabric markers tied to my backpack strap, a piece I didn't remember picking up. It was a dull gray color, almost blending in with the fabric, and written on it in faded ink was a single word: stay. I threw it away immediately, but sometimes when I think back on that day, I can still hear that voice repeating my name from somewhere just out of sight, and I can't help but wonder how many of those paths are still out there, and waiting for someone to take the wrong turn and sign in twice without realizing it. The fire tower log said I had already checked in that morning, but I hadn't even left my truck yet. I remember standing there with the pen in my hand, staring at my own name written in the exact way I sign it. Same loops, same pressure marks, even a small scratch I always make on the last letter. The timestamp was 20 minutes ahead of the current time. I looked around the base of the tower, expecting to see another ranger or maybe a hiker messing with the logbook, but the clearing was empty, completely still except for the wind pushing through the trees. I radioed it in as a possible error, but dispatch sounded distracted, like they were dealing with something else. They told me to proceed with the scheduled patrol and we'd sort the log later. I climbed the tower, each step echoing louder than usual, the metal creaking in a way that made it feel older than it actually was. At the top, everything looked normal at first. The radio equipment was where it should be, the binoculars were mounted properly, and the incident board was clear except for a note I didn't recognize. It was written in red marker, small and cramped, "Do not respond to second call." I stood there for a second trying to figure out who would leave something like that without logging it. There was no signature, no timestamp, nothing official about it. I checked the radio log next. The last entry was from earlier that morning, a routine WED check-in, but the call sign listed was mine. I hadn't made that call. I flipped back a few pages looking for any pattern, but everything else seemed normal. I tried to contact dispatch again, but the signal was weak, cutting in and out. When it did come through, there was a faint overlap, like another conversation running just under mine. I couldn't make out the words, just the rhythm of someone speaking at the same time. I adjusted the frequency, switched channels, but it followed me, always just beneath the main signal. I logged it as interference and moved on, because there wasn't much else I could do. About an hour into the shift, I got the first call. A hiker reporting smoke in a restricted burn area, about 2 miles north. It wasn't unusual. People ignore closure signs all the time, especially during off-season. I grabbed a field kit, marked the coordinates, and started down the tower. Halfway to the ground, the radio crackled again. Same voice, same report, same coordinates. But this time, there was a delay between sentences, like whoever was speaking was listening to themselves before continuing. I froze on the steps, remembering the note upstairs, "Do not respond to second call." I asked dispatch to confirm which report was valid, but they didn't answer. Just that faint overlapping conversation again, louder now, almost synchronized with my own breathing. I decided to follow protocol and respond to the first call, ignoring the second. The trail north was narrow and overgrown, not used much since the burn restrictions went into place. As I moved through it, I started noticing small things that didn't add up. Footprints that appeared and disappeared within a few steps. Branches bent in unnatural directions, like they'd been twisted instead of broken. No dust, no dirt, like it had just been placed there. I checked around for signs of someone nearby, but there was nothing. No movement, no sound, just the constant low hum of the forest. I kept going, marking each unusual detail in my head, planning to log it later. When I reached the coordinates, there was no fire, no smoke, nothing to indicate any kind of activity. Just a small clearing with a ring of stones and a patch of ground that looked darker than the surrounding area, like it had been burned recently, but cleaned up. I circled the area, looking for any sign of the caller, but the only thing I found was a handheld radio lying near the edge of the clearing. It was turned on, tuned to our frequency. I picked it up and immediately heard my own voice coming through, repeating the report I had just responded to. Not a recording, not exactly. The tone was slightly off, the pacing uneven, like someone had memorized my speech and was trying to recreate it. I dropped the radio instinctively, and the voice stopped. For a moment, everything was quiet again. Then my radio came to life with a third call. Same voice, same report, same coordinates, but now there was a new detail. The caller said they could see me. I turned slowly, scanning the tree line, but saw nothing. I called out, identified myself, asked them to step into the clearing, but there was no response. Just the sound of my own breathing coming back through the radio, slightly delayed. It's strange how often people think these kinds of incidents are isolated, but when you work in these areas long enough, you start to notice patterns that don't get written down. I backed out of the clearing, keeping my eyes on the trees, and started heading back toward the tower. The path felt longer this time, like the distance had stretched without me noticing. Every few minutes, I'd hear that same call again, each one adding a small detail, each one slightly different from the last. By the time I reached the base of the tower, the voice was describing my exact movements, step by step, like it was watching me in real time. I didn't look up at the tower right away. I just stood there, listening, trying to figure out if the voice was coming from above or somewhere in the trees. When I finally looked, I saw a figure standing at the top platform. Same uniform, same stance, even the same hat. It was me, or at least it looked like me from that distance. The figure raised a hand slowly, like it was signaling something. My radio crackled again, and this time the voice wasn't repeating me. It was giving instructions. Do not come back up. I took a step backward, then another, not taking my eyes off the tower. The figure didn't move, just stood there, watching. I tried to call dispatch again, but the radio was completely dead now. No signal at all. I made the decision to leave the area and report everything from a different station. As I walked away, I kept expecting to hear footsteps behind me, but there was nothing. Just the sound of the wind and the occasional creak of the tower fading into the distance. When I reached my truck, I checked the time. It matched the timestamp from the logbook exactly, 20 minutes ahead of when I had first arrived. I drove straight to the nearest station and filed a full report. They checked the tower later that day, but there was no one there. The note was gone, the logs were normal, and there was no sign of any second radio. Officially, it was written off as interference and fatigue. Unofficially, they reassigned me to a different sector for the rest of the season. I went back to that tower once, months later, just to see if anything felt off. The logbook was clean, no duplicate entries, no strange notes. But as I was about to leave, I heard a faint crackle from the radio inside the tower, even though it was supposed to be powered down. I paused at the base, listening, and for a brief second, I heard my own voice again, clear and steady, logging a call I hadn't made yet.